Welcome to the Cereneuro Journal Club, where we explore the latest and emerging scientific evidence in neurorehabilitation. Our mission is to bridge the gap between the lab and clinical practice, empowering therapists and patients with knowledge that can truly improve lives.
I'm going to talk about strength training for stroke recovery. I'll start by talking about the paper that I assume that you might have read, and then I'll move on to some newer stuff that we're doing. So like I said, I'll talk about the systematic review, the rationale, results, and what made our review a little bit different than past reviews. And then I'll talk about power-focused strength training a little bit, and maybe that's the future of strength training is what I'll boldly say. Um, and I think that'll be a good jumping off point for some discussion because I think it's a really great new area of research, and I'd love to hear everybody's opinions about it. So as we know, common neurological disability is common after stroke, and there's about 100,000 new strokes each year here in Canada. And loss of physical function is highly common. About 60% of individuals have weakness or coordination issues in the lower extremity. And this can create some activity limitations, so some reductions in physical activity participation, some ADLs. I don't have to tell you folks this, you see it every day. But unfortunately, this can lead to a cycle of detraining where people participate less, and so they're at a greater risk for a recurrent stroke and then further disability after stroke. So it creates this vicious cycle. When it comes to physical activity and strength training, really this paper from 2014 has been cited as the most recent exercise recommendations, at least for all kinds of exercise, from Sandra Billinger in 2014. Note that this is more than 10 years old now, though. But the current recommendations for strength training are about 2 to 3 times per week at 50 to 80% of 1 repetition maximum intensity, and 1 to 3 sets of 10 to 15 repetitions. You'll notice that these are quite broad recommendations. They're not highly specific, mainly because these are actually from people with heart failure. They're not from stroke-specific studies. So really there's limited evidence that's specific to stroke to inform guidelines. So that's why we wanted to go on this venture to help provide that evidence in this systematic review. So we know that strength training can increase strength, but the jury was kind of out on physical function. We didn't know whether that translated to physical function. Findings from previous reviews showed really large effects on muscle strength outcomes. So you can see these are 2 separate meta-analyses from Valdema and Dorsch separately. You can see quite large effects on muscle strength outcomes. However, those same reviews found inconsistent effects on physical function. So things like timed up and go test, walking speed, they're rather inconsistent effects there. But it's important to note that these reviews in the past had quite a few limitations. Firstly, they had restrictions on their eligibility criteria. What they considered strength training was a very narrow scope of strength training. They also had bias in the outcome selection process. And when I talk about bias in outcome selection, how does everybody feel about that language? Do you know what I mean when I talk about bias in the outcome selection process? You can put your hand up in the room, I suppose, if you know what I mean. Okay, that's great. So here's what I mean about bias in the outcome selection process. You'll see that lower body strength in systematic reviews will be shown as in this forest plot with this diamond, right? And you'll be like, oh, there's an improvement in lower body strength. But in reality, when you're doing a systematic review, studies won't just measure one aspect of lower body strength, right? It's likely that they're going to measure things like knee extension, knee flexion, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, right? And all of these different effects are troubling the systematic reviewer because they have to pick which outcome to actually use in their review. And so this can create what's called bias in the outcome selection, because they need to arbitrarily just pick one of these outcomes. So one of the things that we did in our systematic review, and I won't touch upon this again because it's too technical, is we use what's called robust variance estimation meta-analysis. And what this did was we were able to take all of the strength outcomes, for example, and combine them into the lower body strength outcome measure. So that way we're able to use all the available information from the study and not just picking and choosing which one we want to see. So it's an unbiased way to report the effects. So anyway, I digress. These studies also didn't consider differences among patients or the intervention. We know that people in the earlier phases of stroke might see greater effects than people in chronic stages of stroke, but also there's intervention differences, like does frequency matter, does intensity matter, does duration matter, right? And they didn't look at these in these papers. And really important to us is they didn't include partners with lived experience of stroke. They didn't ask stroke survivors what they think about anything in the reviews. And so we wanted to include this. Just some quick stats on this. The British Medical Journal is one of the most high impact journals in the world. And still only 26% of papers published between 2015 and 2019 involved patients or the public. But this is only because they have a requirement that you need to talk about your involvement with patients and the public. Before this was required, less than 1% of papers did this. So we wanted to kind of change the messaging here and start to include the patient's voices in our research. No review on strength training post-stroke has ever done this before. So we wanted to make sure that we were the first. So again, this is the paper that we'll be talking about today. It's our paper in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, where our objectives were to examine the effects of strength training, ST, on patient-important stroke recovery outcomes informed by this advisory group of people with lived experience. Second, we wanted to look at the associations between the prescription parameters like frequency, intensity, type, and duration on stroke recovery to make some practical recommendations for maybe the next set of guidelines. So here's an overview of what we did. We searched through 8 databases, 2 clinical trial registries, and did some hand searching for randomized control trials only that looked at people with stroke or TIA, that measured strength training without any co-intervention. So if they did strength training alongside HIIT, for example, we didn't include that, compared to either no exercise or usual care. And the outcomes were defined by our community advisory group, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So for example, what we did with our patient engagement group is we asked them what participant or study characteristics are important to know and what outcomes fit their definition of stroke recovery. And so what we did was we took all of the outcome measures from the included studies and we presented them to our patient partners, and they rated how important those outcomes are on a scale of 1 to 9. This is the grade rating of importance scale. And we did this because we know that researchers sometimes don't listen to clinicians or patients about what's actually important to measure. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive measure of what's actually important. So they rated these, and we only took outcomes that scored more than 3 on this scale, so that were rated as important or critical for decision making. So that's just one example of how we did patient engagement. And so here's what we found. Many of you might have read the paper, but we ended up with 49 studies across 42 unique randomized control trials. Overall, we had about 2,200 randomized participants between the ages of 49 and 78 years old, and about 40% were females. Broadly, the effects of strength training were positive. It improves functional mobility, increased walking speed, increased fast-paced walking speed, improved balance, increased walking capacity, like the 6-minute walk test, increased lower body strength, and improves ability to perform activities of daily living, which we were really pleasantly surprised about. And so what made the effects different? So obviously the different prescriptions will lead to different results, right? And the answer is yes, quite frankly. And so these are two graphs that were in the article here showing on the left the frequency of sessions per week and on the right the total number of sessions. So the multiplication of frequency times the number of weeks that they did. And so you can see on this first graph that a greater frequency times per week led to an increased benefit for walking capacity. And this is a pretty strong effect here. Similarly, the greater number of sessions over time, so sessions across the entire program, led to an increased benefit for lower body strength as well. What's really interesting is for health-related quality of life, functional strength training performed much poorly than traditional strength training. So we can see that here. Traditional strength training being, using standard machinery or free weights, things like that. Whereas functional strength training, we defined as activities that closely approximate their daily living activities. So this might include, weighted stepping or things of that nature. So it was really interesting to see that traditional strength training was actually superior than functional strength training, at least for health-related quality of life. And then the second graph, and this is really important for our group, is that power-focused intensities might be more beneficial than both high and moderate intensities of exercise. For fast walking speed in particular. You can see the change was about 0.3 meters per second in fast walking speed, which is quite quick. So we thought that maybe power focus intensities might be better, but we noticed that this was based on very few studies. I'll come back to that in a moment, but I also wanted to share the gaps in the literature that we found. Our review certainly isn't a definitive result. There's still some uncertainty, and it's mainly due to these gaps. So for example, there were 3 outcome measures that were deemed critical by our advisory group. So they're really important to the patients, but they were only measured in 4 studies. We're talking things like self-efficacy, we're talking things like cognition. They're really important to patients, but not frequently measured. And so strength training trials are not measuring what's important to patients all the time. But we knew this, researchers do this a lot. This one was really jarring and shocking, is that 70% of studies excluded people with aphasia or cognitive challenges. They would exclude them from the study outright. And I'm sure a lot of you in the room who have worked with people with stroke notice that some of them have aphasia, or at least a good proportion have aphasia or cognitive issues, but they're not represented in these studies. So that was really shocking for us too. And secondly, most studies were in older adults with mild to moderate stroke. So we're missing some key demographics here in the strength training trials, particularly people with other forms of disability like aphasia or cognitive challenges, younger people with strokes, and people with more severe strokes. So those are the limitations of this study, is that we didn't measure strength training in these populations. So I'm going to flip the script back to power-focused strength training. During my PhD, I was really fortunate to receive some funding to start up the power intervention. So we called it Power Exercise for Stroke Recovery, POWER for short. And we found some really positive benefits, and I can talk about them after if you'd like. But we're moving on to the next stage of research where we're partnering with McMaster University and the University of British Columbia, of course, the 2 institutions I am affiliated with, to launch the next phase of POWER, where we're looking at the effects of POWER compared to conventionally recommended strength training. So we're testing those 2014 guidelines compared to our new power-focused strength training intervention. So this is a brief overview of the power intervention. This won't be in, or this wouldn't have been in any of the readings that you might have seen. But this is our progressive strength training intervention called power. And so it's done in 3 different phases, where the first phase is of familiarization, where we do it at a very low intensity, low rating of perceived exertion, just a 2 out of 10, where they just get used to the basic set of exercises. We then move on to a high intensity strength training program. You'll see it's an RPE of 7 to 9 out of 10, which is quite high. And the goal here is to build a really solid foundation of muscle strength before we move on to the power focused intensities. And so, yeah, the exercises in the power phase, we reduce the weight that they lifted, but we ask them to perform the exercises at their highest possible speeds. So they did many more repetitions. You'll see it's 15 to 20 repetitions at a lower RPE, but they did them very, very fast. The goal is their maximum velocity that they can. This was done 3 times per week for 10 weeks. So some powerful examples, this is me being funny, of some of the exercises that we did. So we start with a warm up on a new step, followed by leg press was our key exercise that was held across the entire intervention. We had folks doing step ups. You can see here a gentleman's doing weighted step ups with the things in his hand. Of course, this can be adapted as needed. And then things like lateral lunges too, we included here. And this is an individual with stroke as well. So these are just some examples of the kinds of exercises that we did in our community gym. So what we're doing for the next phase of our trial is the randomized control trial portion. So at baseline, we'll recruit 60 people with chronic stroke, so more than 6 months after their stroke, a modified Rankin scale of less than 4, at least 6 months post-stroke, as I mentioned. They have to be safe to exercise according to the American College of Sports Medicine and can walk 10 meters just for our assessments. We'll measure feasibility indicators like recruitment, assessment, burden, allocation, concealment, but also we're measuring effects of the intervention. So we'll look at the fast timed up and go test, physical function measures, and emotional well-being during the program and after the program. So they'll be randomized to either the power intervention that I talked about previously, or the strength training intervention, which is based on those set of guidelines that I presented on at the very beginning. And so what their program is going to look like is a moderate intensity strength training program, so about an RPE of 4, where they're going to be doing 10 to 15 repetitions 3 times a week and three sets. So they're going to be following these guidelines quite closely. And we're going to see which intervention is better. Again, we're looking at feasibility, so we'll look at adverse event rates, contamination, retention rates. And then after the intervention, of course, we're going to be measuring more feasibility indicators, but also our effect measures to see what the effects of the intervention are, but also whether those effects are sustained after 8 weeks. So if you want to learn more about this next phase of the trial, please feel free to scan this QR code. I didn't want to go into terrible detail about it, but feel free to either contact me or to read more about this on clinical trials. And that's it for me. That's all I've got, and I'm happy to do a little discussion.